Rosie.
Okay, so hello, thank you for hanging around till 3:30 to listen to us bringing up the rear. So I'm Rosie, I'm currently at Birmingham City University, and I'm going to be talking today with my old chum Jamie, who is a friend from PhD days, and this is a project that kind of started back when we were PhD students and has continued on. So we're going to be talking about a practical guide for those wishing to improve gender diversity in mathematical research, which we've titled, What Can You Do? So just as an outline of what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to give a brief overview of like why it began, just talking a bit about the gender gap in maths. And then I'll talk about a workshop that we ran back in 2022 at the University of Birmingham called How to Be an Ally. And then since then, we've written this booklet called What Can You Do? Um, and then I'll pass over to Jamie, who's going to talk about a specific chapter in that booklet based on his experience at Durham, running a representation theory course, and how he contextualized the maths there. And then a little bit of where we're going from here. So you may have seen this diagram in different formats before if you've ever been to sort of an EDI in maths talk. So essentially, it's referred to as like the leaky pipeline of maths, that as you go up through the stages, women just seem to disappear, particularly at the sort of level of PhD and beyond. I've also heard it referred to as a toothpaste tube with holes in, because the leaky pipeline idea sort of implies that there's like just the women are sort of passively disappearing, whereas a toothpaste with holes in indicates that somebody's squeezing them out and there's something going wrong. And so we kind of were thinking, as humble PhD students, what can we do about this? And we ran this workshop back in 2022, myself, Jamie, and two other PhD students. We all had sort of some background in EDI doing various things. I think Jamie was the EDI rep at the time, and I was part of some other initiatives. And we ran this workshop that we wanted to have as like an sort of, I guess it was fairly formal by the end in how we ran it, but it was informal in setting that people could have sort of deep discussions about what allyship in the lens of gender allyship meant to them. And it was aimed at PhD students across the college. So mainly mathematicians, because that's who we knew, but also it was opened out to all engineering and physical sciences. And we wanted to create this sort of bespoke definition. So we thought about having an external speaker coming and speaking about this, but we ended up, and with limited funds, deciding to kind of run it more internally and have it more based on the people in the room. And so we had lots of group activities and a panel discussion with UOB staff who all had some sort of personal experience of maybe an EDI initiative of some sort. And the sort of main selling point of the day was we had this on-site artist called Laura, and she came along. We spoke to her beforehand about our sort of vision of the day, because we didn't like to lead discussion, but the only sort of main leading thing we had was that we wanted people to consider, well, we wanted them to be able to have a bit of a moan about what they wanted institutions to do, but we also wanted them to think about what they could do on an individual level. And so we had this ship going through rocky waters being led by individual and institutional change. And the attendees on the day could take up post-its, so you can see the little yellow post-its. They could then talk to Laura and she would kind of interpret what they'd said and add it onto this big mural. And that was then posted. This is the finished digital copy. That was the original version is still in the Maths PhD office, as far as I'm aware, not been back recently. And we also had a digital print that was printed and put up in the physics building as well. So it kind of sets the culture, I guess, in the office of how we want people to be. So it's a very positive thing. I think it really brightens up an office when it's just got chalkboards. So since then, we've created this website. Yes, the video works. which collates all the resources that we use from the day. And I since gave a talk about this workshop itself. And basically, people can just go online and lift and shift the stuff that we did. We write about the advice of how we ran the day and all our resources that we used, how we promoted it. And there's slides at the bottom here that you could pretty much just pick up and edit for your institution. At the end, I'll share the link to this website in the chat so people can access it, or Jamie can do it now if he's feeling savvy. So yeah, the idea is that people could just pick up the resources and apply it themselves elsewhere, and they can reach out to us. We've had a few people reach out, and a couple of other sort of versions of the event ran. I think at UAB there was one run for staff a year after us, not quite in the same format, but some of the same themes. So then on the other side of things, as I said, I had a bit of EDI experience, I guess. So I was also a co-lead at the time for the Piscopia initiative, which is, if you've not heard of it, it's a UK-wide network of women and underrepresented genders in maths, mainly at PhD level, with the aim of trying to encourage more women to pursue a PhD. And we created this booklet with the Birmingham committee that was trying to illuminate the process of applying for a PhD. And at the time, we always kind of thought maybe we should do a second one. This one was for students. Why don't we do one for staff? A lot of staff are very well-intentioned, but don't necessarily have access to the students the same way we do. We hear a lot about people's experiences. We should collate all this information. And so that then led into our booklet. So what can you do? So very similar sort of format, categorized by, well, we pulled together opinions from Piscopia members. So we ran an event we ran like a workshop at the latest conference where we got people's opinions. I also just drew off my own experience as a co-lead. We had this workshop that we'd already done, so I talked with the group there. And then I also talked to lots of members of staff across the UK and got their perspective on things. And, you know, what had they done that had worked in the past? And we put it all into chapters that are meant to be directed at either your role or who you're trying to help. So there's what can you do for a member of staff? What can you do for a student? What can you do for a friend? There's quite a lot of overlap, but fairly well structured like that. So one of the topics that came up was what can you do as a lecturer? And the kind of key, there were lots of things that didn't make the booklet, but one key story that came out was what Jamie has been doing in Durham. And we decided that would be the main thing that we would focus on this chapter. So I'll pass over to him now.
Thank you, Rosie. Sorry, I couldn't find the link.
It's all right. I'll pin it in later.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the kind of contextualizing mathematics section of the booklet, and I'll start by kind of telling the story of how I kind of came around to kind of writing the material, or the idea that spawned this writing the material. So in last year, I was teaching a fourth year, well, it's a representation theory course, so a very pure mathematics algebra course. It basically, I think the notes when they're passed to me had no real world applications, no reference to anything real, apart from the mention of the mathematicians' names, any theorems that were named after someone. So yes, and it was a relatively large kind of master's level course, 50 students. Crucially, I think the crucial point is it was my first time lecturing. So although I wanted to change stuff, I didn't really have the time or the confidence to radically change the course. But I wanted to kind of add in a bit, and change it in some way and get students to think a bit more about the context. And the opportunity I found was, well, there are 15 named mathematicians in the course, and I wanted to give a kind of small biography to each. And really, when I was doing that, my main motivation beforehand was just to give a bit of a break in the mathematical content, maybe make the theorems a bit more memorable if they remember who Schur is, the Schur behind Schur's theorem is. That might help them. But I'd done this maths as part of my PhD. I've been reading these names for the last 5 or so years and wanted to find out actually who these people were. So, and this wasn't supposed to take a huge amount of my time, a couple of minutes to, 5 to 10 minutes to find each biography and basically using very basic sources like Wikipedia or a very useful source, which is MacTutor, run by University of St Andrews. And on the slide here, we've got two kind of classic examples of some of the named mathematicians. So the first one, and I'll kind of run through what I would say in a biography. So the first one was we've got Isai Schur. So he was he was born in, well, the Russian Empire, which is now Belarus, moved around a lot of the Russian Empire, but eventually settled in Germany, in Berlin, and considered himself German for all of his life. And he's quite fundamental. So Schur's theorem, if you've done representation theory, is one of the first theorems you learn. He was quite fundamental in kind of the early results of representation theory. And when he was in Berlin, he supervised Wilhelm Specht, who was from Berlin himself, had and yes, was supervised by Schur, and then went on to work on representation theory of the symmetric group, which also turned up in the course and gave his name to Specht modules, which are so both of these mathematicians had slightly different upbringings, and were both working in Berlin. And then, well, I haven't mentioned any dates yet, but they were both working in Berlin in the 30s. And this is where their two paths kind of diverged. Because Schur, although he considered himself German, the Nazis saw him just as Jewish and forced him out of his job in 1935. And he ended up dying in poverty in Palestine about 5 years later. Whereas Specht, although he protested against losing a lot of colleagues being forced out of the position, he continued his work. And despite he briefly had to take part in national service, but as a meteorologist, and then was able to work at university afterwards and worked until retirement in the 70s. So had a very long career. And the kind of contrast between these two mathematicians kind of played out throughout the course. So all of the mathematicians mentioned, pretty much all of the mathematicians mentioned in the module were uh, German. They were working in Germany or were working in Germany in the early 20th century. It probably won't surprise you to hear that they were all male. But where you kind of saw this disparity was that many of them had their careers cut short because they were Jewish or they were forced to leave uh, Germany for the States or the UK or elsewhere. And okay, the example of Specht, he did initially protest his colleagues being forced out of positions, but many people working in universities and many students at the time actively participated in these pogroms. So, um, and yeah, I think there's a good story of, well, not a good story, a depressing story of one colleague of Schur would kind of regularly turn up to meetings in his Nazi uniform. So, and this kind of got me thinking beyond just, oh, let's learn a little bit of history. It kind of brings up two important questions of, well, where would pure mathematics be today if these events didn't happen, if these people were allowed to continue and finish their careers? And then the kind of obvious thing, these people were forced out of their careers. Well, who at the time wasn't even allowed to participate? As I said, all of these people mentioned were men. They were all from Europe. So who else was missing from the kind of mathematical story at the time? And all of these ideas kind of fed into the booklet, and as an idea of how to just add a little bit of historical context to a mathematics course. And I'd say that the example course that I was teaching, that's probably one of the more pure courses you can teach. And even then, I was able to find a lot of historical information to put into hopefully make students think a bit more about how the real world influences mathematics and how mathematics influences the real world. So some of these points I've already kind of mentioned, who was or wasn't allowed to participate, what groups were kind of forced out. Um, I'm sure it didn't come up in this course, but I'm sure you can all think of examples of results attributed to someone when actually it was someone far less famous working on it in the background who uh, isn't who missed the attribution. And yeah, and the idea was just to give a few facts. And I think even if these kind of relatively highbrow points of thinking about the context of the mathematics, even if they miss the student, one of the students gave me feedback that said, "Well, I like that the lecturer gives background history about the mathematicians and the theorems because it does make it more memorable." So even then, if you're truly cynical and you think, "Oh, we should really just be teaching them the content," and so they learn the content, this helps them learn the content. So, and in the booklet, we've got a kind of table, which is kind of a good starting point to. So I've kind of populated the table with sure and specs information. It's a good starting point to think about. Well, think about how gender plays into this, how nationality plays into this. Brief history about what the work the mathematician did, and then kind of any surrounding controversy or where you can kind of get an interesting narrative out of this, and prompting you to kind of spot patterns in who was allowed to participate, who was missing, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So Rosie's going to continue with the other sections of the booklet.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly highlight some of the other bits, but that was the one that I thought would be most relevant to the audience today. So, as I said, there's other chapters based off whether you're a PhD supervisor. I think the next one is thoughts from our community that kind of collected up all the things that just fit everywhere, I guess. There was a few points that overlapped quite a lot. So you can pick and choose. We showed that one table, but there's other sort of checklists and other tables, suggested headings basically that you can use. As I was speaking to people, there were so many other suggestions that people had, and we didn't want the booklet to just be one big long list of resources. So we've got this booklet on our website, on both the How to Train Your Allies website and on the Piscopia website. And we've got underneath that a big long list of resources, and they're categorized by sort of additional reading, general reading, funding opportunities, various events, and even advice on conference organization. We've got a small checklist in here of what we did at our Pi Forum conferences, but there's much more and covering slightly adjacent topics. As I said, we've done this mainly under the lens of gender allyship because that's my expertise, I guess, and my experience. But if you pick things from this that you find applicable elsewhere, then that's great. But we're not claiming that this is allyship for everything. As I said, we've talked about the lecturing chapter today, but we also had a blog post published by Her Math Story that's on their homepage at the minute. And I talk a bit more about the invisible workload mentioned here and how that runs through. And that's quite an interesting read if you want to hear a bit more about how we did things. So the key takeaways from today are historically maths was not inclusive, and what are we doing to try and break that cycle? The booklet itself and what Jamie spoke about shows that kind of regardless of your role, you can start implementing things today, everyday behaviors. Lots of these things don't require any like approval from anyone. You can just start doing them. That aim to kind of gradually influence academic culture. And we acknowledge that we definitely have not covered everything. And if you know of other things that you'd like us to add to the list, then we'd be very keen to hear from you. And once I've stopped sharing, I'll put the link in the chat, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said earlier, we can hit the react button with the little clappy hands. And Michael's beard to clap as well. Okay, I don't seem to have any questions in the Q&A yet. Um, but yeah, I think this is a very important subject, and there's a lot to find out. I discovered the other week, or the other week, last month maybe, from Julia Gogg. She was given a talk, and she was talking about the SIR model. You know, the one that was kind of for in epidemiology, and she says that was done by a woman, Hilda Hudson, and that's kind of been forgotten. So there's a lot of things that are not known. Oops. There you go. That's you finished on time. That's why I haven't there. Um, so lots of things are not known, but also I've found when I've been looking things up, there's a lot of it's quite hard to get the information right. Um,
Yeah, so
you know,
okay, if I say so, I said that I was using Wikipedia and MacTutor. They are obviously not, they are obviously fallible sources. MacTutor is very well written, but obviously Wikipedia, if you're thinking about, if you're looking at a statistics course and you're looking at Galton, does shy away from some of the more uh, interesting parts of Galton's career, for example. You do have to do a little bit of a historian's job and think a bit critically about what you're looking at. And it's not, and yeah, there are things that are very well hidden, be it on purpose or by accident. Uh,
Yeah, we suggest the link. It's a resource made by Queen Mary, and it's linked on the actual booklet itself. I think that was quite a lot based off MacTutor, but they probably used other sources. But that one specifically sorts it so that you can pull out via topic or you can pull out via characteristic about a person. Which is really useful if you're a total novice going into things. Yes, obviously, critically think about it, especially as you know history is classically written by the winners, and it's hard to imagine who is missing from the conversation, and are you making it up to say they weren't there? Maybe they really weren't there, but yeah, you've got to yeah think critically about how you're adding these things in.
mm, yeah, and I found digging into these things, I can often found there's conflicting things. You know, like I was trying to work out Fourier had loads of brothers and sisters, and I can't even work out because there's lots of different sources saying how many different brothers and sisters he had. So it's very complicated. But anyway, I see Michael has a question. Michael, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, and thanks for that, Jamie, Rosie. I mean, what's really fantastic to see is the way that you've sort of something that started while you were kind of doing your PhDs, you very much sort of carried on, kept going, kept developing. So my question is, what's next? So Jamie, you kind of adapted your approach, embedded it in your module. What are your plans or your kind of thoughts for where you might take some of this work next? What are your ideas about what you might do and what the sector could do?
Amy,
um,
do you want to start?
so okay, well, in my case, at least on the kind of micro scale of when I really didn't have much of a plan of embedding this into lectures. I think one big difference I would kind of make is actually make this into a physical resource for the students, which I guess is what the thing. So instead of just kind of talking for a couple of minutes in each lecture, maybe provide an additional document with all of these histories, and maybe kind of more explicitly writing down the the kind of interesting questions that they kind of bring up, um, just to make it make it the students think, oh, this is a more formal part of the course, even though it's not an assessed part. This isn't just me waffling on for a bit. So that's on the micro level. That's I think how that what I did can be improved on the larger scale level. Well, um, I guess I suppose this is one big step of it, getting more colleagues to spreading the word, getting more colleagues to think about this. Also linking it. So as Rosie said, that we're kind of just thinking we're mainly coming at it from the kind of gender perspective, but there's a lot of overlap with other kind of kind of important issues. So Durham has a decolonization approach that fits quite well with these two things kind of fit well together, and kind of thinking about the context, thinking about uh, how maths is influenced by the real world and influences the real world, and So kind of linking up with those other initiatives, I think, is a way forward.
So one chapter, we have one, I think it's maybe 1 or 2 pages at the end of the booklet that's called A Word on Accessibility, which is kind of branching out into this, how can you make your materials more accessible? So this booklet, we've got a PDF, but also we made a HTML version of it as well that's available online, branching out into those things. But this is all kind of just our passion project. So the reason we kind of had this website was that we called it How to Train Your Allies rather than How to Be an Ally, because we want other people to start doing the training, right? We want to have already done the work and let other people lead on it. So I've given a few talks, possibly me and Jamie are doing another one of this internally at BCU to try and encourage other people to do it. But I think crucially, what we found with the workshop is the fact that we knew the people in the room was kind of more important in getting people to open up and having that kind of honest conversation, because we were part of the community. And so I think us kind of externally going around and doing the training wouldn't work as well. We want people to be doing it with their colleagues, having those conversations. So hopefully people pick it up and want to do it with us. We're hoping that there'll be kind of well-intentioned people that want to do this stuff, and this will save them time because we'll have done some of the legwork for them.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant, Rosie. I mean, you used the phrase, I won't get it right. I think you said something like we were just humble PhD students at the time. But I mean, I think what it sort of shows is, PhD students have made such an enormous contribution to our teaching and, the nature, the culture of our universities. And I think, what you've both done is shown how you can kind of start to shift the culture, make a contribution, shape the way that we do things. And I think that's that's the other really impressive part of your work, is the way that you've taken things on, but also the way in which I think you've shared it so openly and willingly with the community as well. And that's really to be commended.
Yeah, I think our idea was we'll get them while they're young and then they'll grow up into the professors of the future and they'll already have learned it.
Yeah, and that's how you move cultures, is and you recognize that. So I think, full credit, and it's sort of great to hear you've got kind of plans, and many things sort of start as passion projects, but they're the things that draw more people in and become really important.
Did I see a hand up somewhere?
Well,
Was that just a cheer?
I think there was somebody clapping, or maybe somebody did that. But anyway, I think it was a positive point to end there, I think, though, don't you? So, should we have a round of applause for our speakers, all our speakers today?
All our speakers.
Thanks to all of them. All been very
Thank you for inviting us to speak.
Thank you.
That's okay. It's
Always.
very interesting.
No, it's always a pleasure, and I think the strength of Telmo's, the contributions that we get, the full range. So it's been brilliant to have different perspectives today, which I think's worked really well.